Randy. Welcome to Unleashing Light.
Hi, good morning, Liz. Thank you so much for having me on your show this morning.
Yes, my pleasure. So I have Randy Schiefer here, who has had a near-death experience. His past history is in forensic science, so he's going to share a little bit about his life, his near-death experience, and kind of how that has impacted his life. So, Randy, if you want to start, maybe just by kind of growing up and what that experience was like for you, in relation to your near-death experience and death in general, that would be
Okay.
great.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. Yeah, I grew up actually in South Florida. Um, my family moved down in 1959 from Pennsylvania, and I was very, very close to my father. He was the guy that, you know, I leaned to when I had questions and, growing up about things, and he was my mentor. He taught me how to play little league baseball, and was my coach on the team for many years, and um, took me to work with him all the time, and especially on the weekends and during the summer, obviously when I was out of school. So he, was a very very strong central figure in my life. Taught me how to fish, water ski, you name it, as a boy growing up in South Florida. It was quite a strong bond that we had. And then in 1969, we were actually up in New Jersey on vacation, and he had a massive heart attack and died in my arms. Um, my mother panicked, obviously, when he started, because it was about 4:30 in the morning. We were sound asleep, and I woke up with my mom yelling at me, "Your dad's having a heart attack. You need to save him. Save him. You have to save him. Do something." And I was 16 at the time, and had just looked at a book the day before on a new procedure that came out. We know it as cardiopulmonary resuscitation now. It was called heart massage back then. And I just was at my cousin's house, and he was a firefighter, and I just happened to pick up a first aid book and glance through it. So wasn't proficient by any means, but I was sitting there recalling, I was holding my father, and I knew I needed to clear out his mouth, and I did that. And I knew he had to get onto a hard surface, so I pulled him off the bed. And I went through all the steps that I could remember. The only thing I didn't get to were how to perform compressions, and I didn't know what to do. I just remember it said massage the heart, but I couldn't figure out what that meant. But in the meantime, my sister at that time, she was 6 years old. She was a cough in the camp corner, screaming hysterically, scared. My mother was screaming at me to save my dad. So it was quite a horrific experience that affected me my whole life.
Yeah, that's
Um,
pretty heavy for a teenage boy.
yeah, when you lose such a strong figure in your life, central figure in your life, and
Mhm.
then you feel such guilt that you couldn't save him. Um, I felt just such a tremendous loss in that at the time, my time growing up after my dad, really changed. I didn't become too rebellious as a teenager, but I caused some headaches for sure for my mom. Um, like getting arrested for drag racing down US 1 in South Florida. That was a
Mhm.
big one. And yeah, I surfed all the time, so I skipped a lot of school and went surfing, and um, met my wife that same year, 1969. Um, she was 14 at the time. I had just turned 17, and
Aw.
we stayed together for this coming December next month will be 51 years.
Wow, congratulations. That's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, her and I have we've grown up together. I joined the military and we traveled the world and got to see, you know, sites that we never even dreamed that we'd ever go to, or things that we did. But in the meantime, you know, we lost her mom, we lost my sister. Eventually, we'd lose, you know, my mother. So that the death played a very, very significant role in my life. And I decided early on in the military to go back to school. And I initially got my bachelor's degree in psychology with a minor in law enforcement, and went on to get my master's degree in forensic science, only because of death. I became fascinated by it. I wanted to know what happened when people die. I wanted to know what.
We put a question out to the universe about wanting to know something and what it will drop
Oh,
on the plate, right?
exactly. You know, what goes through the body? You know, what happens when we die? How do we decompose? And all of this just fascinated me. And it drove me to get into forensic science, into law enforcement. And lo and behold, I became a homicide detective and specialized in death investigation, obviously, especially at the crime scenes, because I could go in and interpret what happened at a crime scene, say, based on the blood spatter. I became an expert in blood spatter interpretation. And that's what I did for 20 years in the military. Well, not quite 20 years in the military, because I started out in security police at the beginning, but later became a special agent with the Office of Special Investigations.
And what was just that impact on you alone? Like not having, the experience yet of crossing over and seeing the other side, but just seeing the decomposition of bodies and blood splatter, and I would imagine like a pretty rough angle of death. I mean, was there an impact on you emotionally with that?
No, car, 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 I'm sorry. Because of COVID, I've got um, uh, long COVID, and and my vocal cords were damaged too because I was intubated for so long. So, I just boxed everything up in my head. I compartmentalized everything, um, and it didn't bother me. You know, I went to go. I've been to more autopsies than you know that I could even count, and it just didn't bother me. Because I was there for a reason. I was there to find out why that person or how that person died.
Yeah.
And the effect of his injury or trauma and how it affected his death. So we could determine if it was a homicide or accidental or suicide or whatever the case may be. So when I got out of the Air Force, I went into education and taught at the college level an introduction to forensic science and a couple of specialized courses. So death always played a major role in it. But unbeknownst to everyone, even my wife, I was totally afraid of my own death.
In what ways? Like, what were the fears behind it?
Oh, loss, that I was going to lose everything. That my my thought process at that time was almost like a light switch. You walk over, turn the light switch off, and everything goes black, and that's the end of it. And that scared me to death, literally. I had panic attacks, screaming, totally out of control panic attacks that I hid from my wife. She never knew, and my children. We have 3 girls now, and they never knew anything about it. Growing up, we were not very a religious family. So religion and God didn't play a significant role in my life. I wanted to believe, but I was a skeptic. Because we'd go into church and I'd hear the priest, the pastor, and he would just make comments that didn't make sense to me. In hopes of rising again.
Well, and you
In
were
hope,
space, right? So
yeah.
you know, when you have the science philosophies and theories, you know, it's jarring to kind of think that there's a different possibility.
Yeah. Don't you know you're a priest? Don't you know that we're going to rise or not? You know, like he's supposed to be the closest person to God, and you know, and he didn't even know. So some of the other things that went on, it just didn't sit well
Mhm.
with me. My kids went to Catholic school. My wife was a strong Catholic, and it was her wishes they attended Catholic school. But even with my kids, we didn't really discuss God, religion, death, dying, faith. We had the family prayer dinner, not said by me, always said by the kids, um, because I I didn't have a strong education in that area. Never read the Bible, didn't know a whole lot about it. Didn't know anything really when it became, to the religious side of it. Other than I knew I was scared of my death, and God, I just prayed that there was something afterwards, and I'm going to lose my family, and some of that came from my mom because my mom felt the same way, and I know she always said that her greatest fear was losing her family and losing the connections, and obviously, your mother is another strong figure in your life, and that boil over into some of my beliefs. I think the only time I really ever went to church as a young kid, especially after my dad died, I'd go to Easter Sunday one morning just to impress a girl that I was dating or something, just to meet her,
Whatever the
hang out
motivation.
afterwards. So that was my religion. It wasn't strong religiously, and obviously that probably affected my belief, my feelings on death as well, because I didn't have faith. Um, so when I caught COVID in March of 2020, very, very early on, just at the beginning,
Right.
when COVID really started to hit. And my daughter, my youngest daughter, Lisa, is a nurse. And up in Northwest Florida, where I live now, she has a rental property. And the two of us went up to her rental property that day just to do some work. It was the tenants had just moved out. We were getting the townhome, ready to put back up on the market. And we went out to lunch and we came back and we both said, "Boy, what happened? We don't feel well, and passed it off as well. Maybe we ate something that didn't agree with us." But as the day went on, we just found ourselves getting, oh my, just exhausted, with some of the basic stuff, like moving a ladder, just we struggled with, you know. And again, I said, this getting old stuff is for the birds. I was 67 at the time. And I said, this is getting crazy. I can't do some of this stuff. So we finished up and drove home. And by the time we got back to her house, about a 45-minute drive, the two of us were just absolutely, just worn out. Just struggled putting, our tools away and everything that we had taken up with us. And I went in and I told my wife I wasn't feeling well. I was going to go in and lay down. And they encouraged me the next day or two, go to the doctor, get checked out. And I said, "Oh, I probably just the flu. I'll be fine. It will pass." And my daughter at the time lived in Mississippi, so she returned to Mississippi. And I have one daughter at the time was living in Ohio, and my other daughter lived probably about 25 minutes. She still lives 25 minutes away from us.
Mhm.
So they both encouraged me to go. I said, "Well, if I'm not feeling well by, Monday, I'll go to the doctor."
Mhm.
So I did. I went in, called, got an appointment, went in, and he said, "Oh, you have the flu." He said, "You're not feeling well. You're achy. Um, you're tired. You're running a low-grade fever, having a hard time breathing. You got the flu." And I said, "Well, can I get tested for COVID?" They said, "No." we can't test you for COVID. Because if you remember at the time back in 2020, the FDA came out and they had like 5 or 6 questions
Yeah.
to get tested. Have you traveled? Had you had contact? All that. And of course, all of mine were no, no, no. I haven't traveled out of the state. I haven't had contact with anybody that I knew had COVID. All my answers were no. So they wouldn't test me. Well, 2 days later, I was so sick that I went back and I saw a physician assistant that day. And he told me the same thing. Oh, you have the flu. My wife has it. She's homesick. You have the flu. I said, well, test me for it. So they tested me for it, came back negative. I said, I want to get tested for COVID. 5 questions. Boom, boom, boom. Nope. I haven't traveled, haven't had contact. No,
So
we're not going to test you.
they tested you for the flu and the flu came back negative.
Negative, right.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
And of course, I got the song and dance. Well, these tests aren't 100%, but you have the flu, just go home and rest.
Mhm.
So the next day, my wife went up to my daughter's townhome to show a renter her townhome, and my oldest daughter swung by the house to check on me, and she called my nurse doctor over in Mississippi, and she said, Dad really looks bad. He's gray and is really having a hard time breathing. She says, get him to the emergency room right away. And being a man, I said, no, I'm not going to the emergency room. I'm going to lay here and we'll be okay. So my daughter said, you have a choice. I'll call 911. You can go by ambulance or you can get in the car and I'll take you. So I finally agreed. And she took me down to the emergency room. Yeah, I know. And I walked in and I told the clerk, I said, look, I'm really sick. I need to see somebody. And they stopped my daughter from coming into the emergency room because of COVID restrictions. She couldn't come in. And she yelled from the door. She says, Dad, I'll just wait in the parking lot. Let me know when you're ready. I'll come swing up and pick you up. Okay, thank you. Love you. Blew each other a kiss. And little did I know that would be the last time I saw a family member for 6 weeks.
Wow.
They took me back, put me in an isolation room, and admitted me at the hospital for bilateral pneumonia. And they tested me for COVID, but it would take 24 hours to get the test back. So they admitted me, and I went up to intensive care in a isolation room.
Mhm.
And by 48 hours later, I remember a doctor coming in and said, you're not getting enough oxygen. We're going to have to put a tube down your throat to help you breathe.
They gotten your results at this point for the COVID?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, 24 hours, it came back positive.
Oh,
Yeah, came back positive for COVID.
gotcha.
So I maxed out the ventilator within 24 hours. So they put me to sleep, put a tube down my throat, put me on the ventilator. And within that short period of time, I went into acute respiratory failure. So my daughter, Lisa, the nurse, was in constant contact with the hospital. What are they doing? She knows all the lingo. So she was asking for test results and X-ray results, and she was staying on top of things. And the doctor told her at that time, he said, we just put your dad on a ventilator. He said, knowing that he has COVID and his lungs are both filled with COVID, he said, think of it like a jello. And he said, that's exactly what's in his lungs. He said, just this jello that has filled both of his lungs. And my right lung had collapsed by that time. And he goes, he probably has about a 3% chance of survival.
Yikes.
So she moved, she came home. She was in Mississippi. She came home.
Mhm.
My middle daughter came down from Ohio. So it was my 3 girls and my wife here at the house. And my wife put Lisa in charge of communicating with the hospital. since she knew the lingo and knew who to talk to and what questions to ask. And my middle daughter was keeping our family and friends up to date on my conditions through social media. And then my oldest daughter was in charge of the prayer chain. She went out and created a prayer chain, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the power of prayer is very powerful, trust me. So the hospital called my daughter and said, look, there's nothing really more we can do for your dad here at this hospital. We want to send him over to our larger hospital in Pensacola. So I was care flighted over while still on the ventilator. I was the first COVID patient that was airlifted, so I presented some challenges for that group of people, of how to deal with me and keep me on the ventilator. And I can only imagine, but I don't remember the ride. I was in a coma. And when I went over got into the larger hospital in Pensacola, I went straight into surgery, and they put me on an ECMO machine. It's an extracorporeal. I have to read it because I can never remember it or say it half the time. It's basically a heart-lung bypass machine, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, ECMO, ECMO, and it's a heart-lung bypass. They pull my blood out. They went through my neck with a tube into my heart and pulled my blood out. By this time, my heart had enlarged and wasn't pumping effectively as well. So that would pull my blood out, oxygenate it, and then act as my heart and pump everything back into me. So it was basically on heart-lung bypass. Very similar to what they give when they do open heart surgeries. They put you on a heart-lung bypass machine. That's exactly what it is. I went into kidney failure. My kidneys failed. My liver enlarged and was throwing blood clots. So I was in respiratory failure, kidney failure, real close to heart failure. And I was on ECMO for just shy of 21 days that I was on the ECMO machine. And during that period of time, again, my daughter stayed in contact with the hospital and different doctors. And she called a friend of hers up in Kentucky, where she went to school, University of Kentucky. And her dad, this one nurse's dad, was an infectious disease doctor who ended up calling my daughter and said, you need to get your dad convalescent plasma. He said, whatever you do, get it to him. Convince the hospital. Convalescent plasma, if you have COVID and you get better, your body develops antibodies to fight that disease. It's just like the flu. You get the flu and your body develops antibodies to help fight that flu. So what they can do is the blood donation centers up in our Northwest Florida, we have One Blood. Others just have the Red Cross for blood donations. I encourage everybody to become a donor. They can remove your plasma and then give it to someone that needs it. So the hospital told my family that they would consider giving it to me if my family could find a donor. Because at that time, there were no donors. I mean, COVID was running rampant. All of that shut down, So my middle daughter took to social media and developed on her Facebook page a post that went out to over 80,000 people have seen it or shared it, looking for a donor. And our blood donation center was very specific when my daughter called them and asked if they could assist in getting convalescent plasma for me, explained my situation, that I needed this plasma. That organization just jumped right in, even with COVID. They got people trained, how to take it. They just said we don't have a donor list because for Northwest Florida, that was the first time that they've been asked for convalescent plasma. They down in Miami, they did a couple of people down in Miami and were successful with it down there, but they didn't receive any requests up here until my family called. But they got people trained. Lo and behold, there's a young gentleman in Pensacola that was a perfect match with my blood type who had COVID and got better and volunteered to become a donor.
Wonderful.
So he donated his plasma, and on Good Friday of that year, my daughter received a telephone call saying that they had permission to give me convalescent plasma. Now, I will say the hospital was reluctant to give it to me, even once we had it, because it was so experimental.
Even with such a small chance of living, they were reluctant, or did they not?
Very reluctant. Yeah, very reluctant to give it to me because I'm sure it was a liability issue for them. But my daughter was very persistent, had phone calls and Zoom meetings with all kind of CEOs and presidents and chiefs of this and chiefs of that at the hospital. And she stayed on top of it, and they finally agreed to give it to me.
You got yourself daughters.
Oh, I know. She was a very, it wasn't for her advocating for me like in such a strong manner. I wouldn't be sitting here today, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
But they gave it to me on Good Friday. And by Easter morning, my lungs had cleared enough that they turned off the ECMO machine. That's how quickly my lungs cleared. By Easter Monday, my kidneys were back fully functioning. My liver came back to normal.
Oh my God.
My heart returned to its normal size and started pumping adequately.
And they contribute all of that to the plasma?
I do. Oh. I contribute it to plasma and God.
Yeah.
Like I said, my daughter created that prayer chain, and she gave me a map that shows every state that she had a group praying for me. And there's 47 states here in the United States and 6 countries that were all praying on my behalf for my survival. So the power of prayer. I'm sure God was overwhelmed. He probably said, look, turn this off, okay? I'll save the guy. Just turn it off. Oh my God. He was overwhelmed with the prayers that they received, So yeah, the power of prayer is great. It really is, because I think, that's another ace up my sleeve that I had. I became the first person to survive at that hospital from COVID.
Wow.
I was the first person to walk out the door alive that had it so bad. I became the first person in Northwest Florida to receive convalescent plasma and 34th in the nation to receive it. My daughter had to go to the FDA for emergency approval for use. And she had to have a doctor sign off on the paperwork. And again, the doctors at the hospital were reluctant to do it. But one doctor, my respiratory care doctor, agreed, and he signed off on the paperwork to get it approved. He was in favor of giving it to me all along, my respiratory care doctor, who put me on ECMO. And he's someone sent from God to help with that.
In your favor.
I was blessed for not believing at the time, having my head, God took me in his arms, and he certainly blessed me. He blessed me in so many different ways. While I was in the coma and so close to death, I did experience uh, at least 4 near-death experiences. Now, I don't know what order any of these were in. I cannot tell you what came first, second, or third, or anything, but I had dreams. I know I had dreams, and I had hallucinations because I can clearly remember the 6 dancing panda bears on the ceiling in the hospital room. I can remember seeing them. And I remember seeing my dogs uh, swimming in a birthing pool that was right outside my hospital room, you know. So I had some good hallucinations. I mean, I was on some heavy drugs, I know that, but I definitely had those. But my near-death experiences were completely different. Um, it was so real, and I was so in the present, if that makes sense. Um, very, very clear. I don't know, I dream. When I dream, even when back then, things are not real clear. Backgrounds are not real in focus and sharp. Colors are not real bright and vivid. Even in my dreams that I had back then, it was that way.
Yeah, I've had
Um,
other people that have had NDEs, and they say that there's 180 primary colors on the other side that they just can't even begin.
uh, Again, to describe.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's absolutely. But I remember my consciousness awoke, and at the time, I thought I was in. Now, remember, I didn't really know about near-death experiences going into this. So when I tried to relate it to my daughter, because I quickly found out that I couldn't talk to the doctors about it, they shut me down and walked out of the room. A few nurses did the same thing. Um, but when my last week, when they finally brought me out of the coma, and that last week in the hospital, um, they allowed my daughter to come in and stay with me. She grew very close to some doctors and nurses, and they said, once you go in that room, you ain't leaving until he tests negative. And she agreed. She came in. So that was the first family member that I saw. And obviously, it was quite a emotional reunion between the two of us. And she told me, not a lot, because I was still pretty, foggy of what was going on, and just trying to comprehend losing 4 weeks or 5 weeks that I was in that coma, and just coming to deal with everything that she told me that I had been through. At one point, I finally told her, I said, Lisa, I said, I wasn't here during this. And she says, what are you talking about? She goes, I traveled. I wasn't here. She says, Dad, the only thing you traveled from is one hospital to another. You've been in that bed the whole time. I said, no, I was not here. And so I initially told her, I said, it was like my consciousness woke up, and I was in like an airplane fuselage, the tunnel. And I was in the tunnel, and it was very dark in the tunnel. But there was a brilliant light that surrounded the tunnel. It was very bright, but it didn't penetrate into the tunnel itself, but I could feel it, and I knew it was there, and I could feel the warmth of it. And I just felt at peace, and I felt calm, and I knew I had died. I remember saying to myself,
How did you know? How did
oh, I
you?
said to myself, you're dead. He said, I remember saying to myself, you died, you're dead. And I said, I'm dead, but where am I going? I remember saying that to myself. And I was passing down. Not some people have said they traveled very quickly in that tunnel, but I didn't. I traveled not real fast, but I was moving along at a pace. And I finally came to the end, and there was a very, very bright light at the end of the tunnel. And when I exited the tunnel, I was in a beautiful room, a beautiful hallway. Um, I was standing on a mezzanine, looking down into this room. And the room was absolutely gorgeous. It had water features in every corner, big, beautiful crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. And just like some of the older churches in England, the ceiling was vaulted. It was round and it was vaulted ceilings, and there were stained glass windows on the side. There was three stained glass windows on each side, and under each window there was an archway that led into some other portion of this room that I was in. And it was just it was all outlined in gold and just sparkled and just absolutely was beautiful. And the feeling standing there was just, oh my God, it was so calm and so peaceful. And I felt so relaxed being there. And I felt a presence. There was somebody with me, but I couldn't see them, but I felt them. I knew somebody was with me. And um, a man came up to us. He had a beard, dark hair, and a beard, and almost like a brown robe that he had on. And he came up, and when he approached me, I said, "This room is absolutely beautiful. I can't believe its beauty." And he goes, "Yes," he said, "this is one of our most favorite places." He says, "But you don't belong here." He said, "You have to leave." And he pointed over to some huge, beautiful hand carved oak doors. And they were just outlined in gold and just tall. I just remember them being as tall as you could see. And he pointed to them. And I remember moving over toward these doors, and they opened up, and I went out onto a set of steps into a just a beautiful city. It was in an absolutely gorgeous city. The skyscrapers were just as high as you could see, and gold and opaque colored windows. Um, and this presence with me, I felt we didn't communicate, but I felt we needed to move on. And we moved through, started going through the streets of this beautiful city. And we passed beautiful green parks. And the green grass was just ablaze in its color. And I've traveled to the Highlands of Scotland and to Ireland, and I've seen some beautiful, deep green grass, but this didn't touch it. This was just absolutely beautiful. And there were kids playing in a distance, playing in these parks, in these fields. And obviously there was no cars or buses or anything, but we moved through the streets. And suddenly I realized I was lost. And I got very scared. I didn't know how to get back. The presence, the person that was with me had left. And I got scared and I said, "I'm lost. I cannot get back. How am I going to get back?" And I sat down and I remember crying. And I remember being cold and wet. And people, I could feel people moving past. And I remember crying out to them, "Please, someone help me, please." But nobody did. Um, so I looked over my shoulder, and here was this big, beautiful staircase as far as you could see up into the sky. And I said, if I can get over to that staircase, maybe somebody will find me. Maybe somebody will see me and help me. And I remember moving over to the staircase, and I felt like I was crawling up the steps, not walking, but I was crawling. I have no idea how high I got or how far I got, but suddenly I heard a voice come on, and he said, "There he is. There's Randy. Get him." And with that, I was gone. Everything had gone back, and I say that I returned to my sedated environment, you know. But I was back in that city a second time. but in a different part of the city. Same beautiful concept, same beautiful uh, towers and buildings, and again, I said, I know where those steps are. I'm lost, but I know where those steps are, and I'm going to get back to those steps because I was found on those steps. I made my way back to those steps, and I started to ascend them again. And again, I heard the voice, there's Randy. And I turned to see who was there. And there was this man with white hair, a white beard, and a beautiful glowing white robe with a beautiful gold sash around his waist. And he's the one that pulled me off those steps.
So
It's
they were
just like
trying
some,
to go, you're not leaving, like get back in your body. Is that kind
exactly. I was not supposed to be there. I was not supposed to be there. It was just like somebody grabbed me by the shirt collar and just whisked me off of those steps. And I was gone. I was back into my little sedated world, you know? And I've had people tell me when I've mentioned this, they said, well, you weren't in heaven. You know, it sounds because God wouldn't let you suffer in heaven. And I said, no. I said, he had to let me suffer. He had to let me feel what I felt before when I thought about death, the panicking, the shivering, the isolation, you know. I thought I was the only person that ever felt that way, you know. Why didn't other people fear their death? So God had to let me feel those again. And then he saved me. He pulled me off that steps. So yeah, I believe I was heaven. And if you think about the story in the Bible of the shepherd, and the shepherd with the 99 sheep, and he lost one sheep, and he left his flock to go find the one and brought it back. I said, that was me. He found me. He pulled me off those steps because I wasn't supposed to be there, you know. I remember being back in that tunnel, and my consciousness awoke, and I was on a beautiful pathway, dirt pathway, and it was lined with beautiful flowers. You know, you mentioned all the flowers or all the colors that other people have seen and mentioned, and every color, and some colors you can't even identify, were in flowers along this pathway. And out on both sides were just this beautiful meadow of green grass again. And there was a river that meandered off next to it that I was moving down. Beautiful, lined with beautiful, magnificent trees. Just, and again, I said to myself, you're dead, you died. And again, I said, but where am I? Where am I going? And as I walked down this pathway, I should say moved because I wasn't conscious of any real body. But as I moved down this pathway, this little boy came out. He suddenly appeared. And I'd say he was a little boy of maybe 9, 10 years old, olive skin, dark hair. He had a little bowl haircut, you know. He had 3/4 length shorts on, barefoot, no shirt, very animated, very animated. Follow me, waving his arms. Follow me, follow me, follow me. So I followed him, and he took me into this room, and it was just, again, absolutely beautiful, lined in gold and just colors that shined. And, you know, I felt so at home. I felt so much peace and comfort of where I was. And I remember a big window. And I went over to this window, and I was looking out of this window, and the river that I saw ran underneath this room. And there was people in the water. They weren't playing around or frolicking in the water, but they were over on the sides of the banks, you know, talking, very peaceful. And I remember just taking in the beauty of this scenery. And I have no clue again how long I was there, but I remember the little boy came back in to the room and he goes, "I'm sorry, you have to leave." And I said, "I don't want to leave." I said, "I love it here." I said, "I feel so much at home and I feel so at peace." And I said, and warm and loved. And he goes, "Yes." He said, "But your room isn't ready. You have to leave." And with that, I was out, gone to my little dark, sedated world.
And could you feel, could you sense the sedation in the darkness? Like, were you aware of that switch? Or you did just the beauty go away? Or how do you,
It was just like you turned off that switch. Boom. Everything went black. It was that quick, you know, it was just gone. Um,
and so
and when I was,
oh,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry.
What was the transition then? So you obviously come back into your body and then you've got to get back to the world here on Earth. And what was that transition like for you?
Um, when I got back, obviously everything was just dark. I mean, my thought process didn't start until my next near death experience. I mean, I was just out black.
Was the one after that as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I woke up at the end of that tunnel and I was in a void. And it wasn't pitch black, but it was like very late dusk, maybe. You could still see, and these orbs of light were moving past me.
Mhm.
And again, I felt the presence of someone. Someone was with me. And again, we had to move. And as we went into this void, Liz, you've been to the theater and you're sitting with a dark stage, and suddenly a light comes on in the corner, dim light, and it gets brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter. And there stands the actor on stage. Well, that's what happened. As we moved into this void, this light came on and it got brighter and brighter and brighter. And there stood my deceased mother in law.
Mm.
Saw her just as clear, Liz, I'm looking at you today.
Oh.
Um, she was sitting at a table, I think, or some type of a bar, maybe, I don't know. But she was sitting there very, very regally, very straight and proper. She had a white gown on. She had very long hair and she had it tied up with this beautiful ribbon around the top of her hair. Her right arm was poised on the arm of the chair, and she was sitting there just magnificently. And I was yelling to her, "Dolores, it's me, Randy. I'm here. I'm here." But she wouldn't acknowledge me.
Mhm.
She looked over and then looked away. And as we got deeper, my deceased brother in law ran by, much younger. My wife asked me what age her mom was. And I said, because she died in her 70s and from Lou Gehrig's disease. And that's takes a tremendous toll on the body. But she was perfect. She, she looked beautiful. She was in her 30s. She looked absolutely stunning. And her brother was much younger. Her brother died from a drug overdose when he was in his 30s, and he was probably in his teenager years. He came running by me real quick, and I yelled at him, "Mark, it's me, Mark, Mark." And he didn't even acknowledge me. He kept running. So I was told we needed to move on. So we moved deeper into the void, and suddenly that light, because you can see 360 degrees around and you know what's happening all around you at one time. It's very, very strange feeling. But that light over my mother-in-law started to dim. And finally, it just went dark and she was gone. And we moved on. As that light went off, another light went on in the back, much further away from me. I knew in an instant that it was my mom, my dad, and my sister. Knew it. And I started yelling at them. Mom, Dad, it's me. It's Randy. Come get me. And I felt at that time, felt that there was some type of barrier between me and them. Maybe that's why they couldn't hear me. My kids later described it, well, Dad, that was the veil of death. And they didn't want you to pass through that veil. At the time, these were all new concepts that, I was on sensory overload trying to understand all of this. And I got educated on it. But she said, Dad, they didn't want you to pass through that veil. That's why they didn't acknowledge you. That's why they didn't
showing
encourage you.
themselves to say, I'm here with you, but you're not coming.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember when I'm sitting there yelling at them, I remember off in the distance, this orb of light caught my attention. And it was traveling very fast. And it came right up and it stopped right in front of me. And a man's face materialized for just a brief instant. And he said to me, tell Madison at the salon her grandfather's okay. And he went over to a white porch and he was showing me being made red, white, and blue ribbons and American flags. And as he was doing this, the word veteran permeated me. I mean, I felt it. I heard it. It was just veteran, veteran, veteran. It just went through me, very, very odd feeling. And with that, my guide said, you have to leave. You have to go. And again, I went back to my dark, sedated world. So I remember I remember a nurse rubbing my chest. And I've seen this nurse before. She had a dark gas mask, a black gas mask on. Her hair was tied up in a bow or in a bun on top of her head. And I have seen her before, even in my sedated world. I remember seeing her. And I loved her voice. I remember hearing her voice as I was laying there. And she would always come in and say, hi, Mr. Randy, I'm with you today. We're going to have a good day. And every time I heard her voice, I knew I was going to be safe, that I knew laying there, I was going to be okay. And I just loved hearing from her, and she would talk to me. There was another nurse that came in, older lady, white hair. She did not wear protective gear, no gloves, no mask. She would come up to the side of my bed, comb my hair, and talk to me. And I knew she worked there part-time, that she worked ICU for many years. And later on, when I asked Mallory, the nurse that was in the gas mask, who she was, she said, Mr. Randy, we don't have anybody in ICU like that. And she said, and they would not be allowed in your room without protective equipment on. So I said, who is this lady that came to see me?
Yeah.
I don't know, But I remember coming out, Mallory would rub my sternum very, very hard and would yell questions at me to get me back orientated to consciousness. And it took a while, but things weren't rational to me. Things weren't adding up. You know what I mean? They told me that I'd been in a coma for 6 weeks, and instead of or 4 weeks, instead of saying, "Oh my God, what," it just didn't. I just couldn't comprehend it. And it took me a long time before I could. And I started telling my daughter. Like I said, they let my daughter Lisa in with me, and I tried to talk to nurses, and uh, Mallory, my one nurse that I really liked, she was with the intensive care ECMO machine team, because I had to have, when I was on ECMO, I had to have two nurses present in my room 24 hours a day. So she left with that team. So I saw her afterwards, but to thank her, but I didn't, she wasn't one of my regular nurses. And when I tried to tell the other nurses because I wanted to get these feelings out, what I had experienced, but they weren't, they weren't real good at listening. They would just say, "Oh my, you've really had an experience," and turn around and walk out. And doctors did the same thing. So I was telling my daughter this, and I told her that this man approached me and he had a message for his granddaughter. And my daughter said, "Well, who was the man?" And I said, "I have no clue. I don't know who he is. Never saw him before." I said, "But he was a fellow veteran." And I said, "So I have to find his granddaughter." And my daughter said, "Well, who's Mallory?" Or, I'm sorry, Madison. She goes, "Who's Madison?" And I said, "I don't know." I said, "I don't know a Madison. How are you going to find her?" I said, "I have no clue." I said, "But I have to try." So I got released from the hospital in a wheelchair. I had to learn to walk again, had to learn to swallow. I was on extensive physical therapy. Here, people come to the house every day, occupational therapy, speech therapy. And I remember being back in my bedroom, and I don't know, for some reason, I just started rummaging through a junk drawer. Everybody has them, you know? And I started rummaging through this junk drawer, and I came across a business card to a local barbershop in town. So I said, "Well, yeah, I'm going to get my hair cut." So I wheeled my wheelchair out, and I handed this business card to my wife. And I said, "Could you call these people and see what they're doing with COVID, if I can come down and get my hair cut? And if I can, see if I need to make an appointment or what." I said, "I really would like to get my hair cut." With that, I went back into my bedroom. A few minutes later, my daughter comes in and she's got the business card. And she says, "Lisa moved in with us to take care of me. That's the only way that I could come home from the hospital, is if Lisa lived with me, or they were going to send me to a rehabilitation center." And I refused to go there. I said, "No, I'm going home." And so she brought this card back, and she goes, "Dad, where'd you get this card?" I said, "I got it over there out of my junk drawer." She goes, "No, where did you get the card?" And I said, Lisa, I said, "I don't know. I just found it. You know, I said, by the looks of it, it's been there for a while." And she said, "Have you looked at the card?" And she started asking me all these questions about this card. And I told her, I said, "Lisa, I'm the interrogator in the family, not you. What are you getting at? You know?" And she said, "Dad, look at the card." And I looked at the card. She says, "I think we found your Madison." And
Oh,
clearly written on the card was the name Madison Logan. I
mm,
never saw it before, you know. And I said, "You call and make that appointment."
mm,
And she did. And next day we went down, and everybody had to wait outside, and then at one, because of COVID restrictions, and one individually you got called in to get your hair cut. But they saw me, I was in a walker there, and they asked me to come in and sit down. So we were sitting there, and Lisa said, "Dad, which one is Madison?" And I said, "I don't know. You know, I said, "We'll just have to wait and see who calls us." A few minutes later, this little girl walks up, and dark hair. And she said, "Hi, I'm Madison." "I think you're my next appointment." So we go back. She's cutting my hair. My wife gave me the dickens when I got home for asking her all of these questions in the middle of a haircut. But I said, "Madison," my daughter had told her how sick I was, that I was in a coma and everything. And I said, "Madison," I said, "can I ask you some personal questions?" And she said, "Yeah," cut my hair. And I said, "Are both of your grandfathers still alive?" And she goes, "No." She said, "The one grandfather that I was closest with," he says, "kind of my favorite grandfather," he says, "died." She said, this was in May. I got out of the hospital on May the 8th of 2020, went in on March the 26th, got out on May of 2020. And she goes, "No," she says, "next month, which would be June," she said, he had died a year ago next month. And I said, "Oh," I said, "was he a veteran?" And she goes, "Yeah." She says, "He was a veteran." She says, "He served in Vietnam and, always talked about the army and, things." And I said, "Does he live here in Northwest Florida?" Thinking maybe I saw this man somewhere and just didn't remember him. And she goes, "Oh, no." She says, "My whole family lives in Iowa." She said, "I'm the only one that is down here." And she said, "My husband, who just got his doctorate in physical therapy," she goes, "we're just down here for a year or two, and then we're going to move back to Iowa." And I said, "Oh," I said, "has your grandfather visited you while you've been here?" And she goes, "No." She says, "I don't even think my grandfather's ever been to Florida." She said, "He's never been in the area at all. And I said, "Oh." I said, "Well, Madison," I said, "I think your grandfather came to me, and I said, he has a message for you." And she's looking at me like, I'm a bit strange. I said, "But Madison," he distinctly said, "tell Madison at the salon, your grandfather is okay. He wants you to know that he's okay in heaven." Instantly, she's crying. I'm crying. My daughter's crying. People around us are looking like, "Man, she must have screwed up his haircut bad," because they're they're all crying over in that corner. Um, and after a few minutes, I said, "Madison," I said, your grandfather moved onto a white porch. Is that significant somehow?" And she said, "That was his house in Iowa." She said he had a white porch, and she said he loved sitting on his porch, watching the people walk by the house and talking to him and stuff. And I said, "Well, he showed me or was making red, white, and blue ribbons and American flags." I said, "Is that significant somehow?" Liz, she took a step back and her eyes got as big as saucers. And she said, "He belonged to the American Legion. And every Veterans Day, her whole family would go down to the American Legion and help him and the other veterans make red, white, and blue ribbons and American flags to the veterans' graves."
They will tell you enough to make sure they know it's not a mistake, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. I mean, I did not know the family. I know them now. I did not know the family. I've never communicated with the family. But her grandfather, his name was John. I'm sorry.
No, take your time. It's okay. It was a deeply.
But John entrusted me, and he loved that family so much that he wanted to know. He wanted me to tell them he was okay, that he was safe. And a few weeks passed, and Madison called me. She was, "My grandmother would like to talk to you." I said, "I'd love to talk to your grandmother. So Kathy and I had a nice conversation on the phone. She's a card. She says to me, "Okay, tell me this story." So I told her, and She said, "Did you see his face?" And I said, "Just for an instant, just a brief instant, Kath." She says, "Describe it." And I said, "It was a younger man." I said, "Olive skin." I said, "Dark hair." And I said, "I think he had a mustache." I said, "I'm not sure." I said, "But I think he had a mustache." She goes, "I'm going to send you a picture." And she sent me this picture. And I called her back. I said, "Kathy, that's who I saw." He was in military uniform. He was over in Vietnam when the picture was taken. But dark hair, mustache. I said, "Kath, that's who I saw." And I said, "Man, he must have loved you guys." Oh. So Kathy said, "I have to tell you a story." I said, "Okay." She said, right after John died, she said several months after John died, um, she was going through her dresser drawer and found a business card to an insurance company. And it had a name and a phone number on the back of the card. She said, "So I dialed the number thinking that maybe he had insurance that I didn't know about or something, you know." And she said, a man answered the phone. And she said, "Hi, I'm Kathy." She said, "I'm calling from Iowa." And she said, "My husband's John just passed away." And she goes, "I'm checking on this policy." She goes, "I found a business card. And the man said, "No, no, no." He says, "Ma'am, you dialed the wrong phone number." He goes, "I have nothing to do with insurance." And she says, "Oh," she goes, "Oh, I'm sorry." She reads the phone number off. And he says, "No." She says, "I'm sorry." He says, "You dialed the wrong area code." And she said, "Well, where am I calling?" She said, "Well, you're calling California." And she says, "Oh, I am so sorry." And he says, where are you calling from?" And she goes, "Well, I'm calling from Iowa." And she says, "Randy, the phone went quiet." And the man came back on and he said, "And you said your name was Kathy?" "Yes." "And you're calling from Iowa?" "Yes." He goes, "I have to tell you a story." He says, "A few weeks or a few months ago," he goes, "I was in a very bad motorcycle accident. And the paramedics told me when they scraped me off the asphalt, I was dead." He said, "But while I was dead, the only thing I could hear was somebody yelling at me, 'Tell Kathy from Iowa John is okay. Tell Kathy from Iowa John is okay.'" And he kept yelling it and yelling it. And I kept yelling back to him, "I do not know Kathy from Iowa." And he kept yelling, "Tell Kathy from Iowa John is okay."
Enough to make it
John,
go away, right?
John is a pesky spirit that wants to be sure that his family knows that he is okay. What are the odds of that? I mean, what are the odds of me seeing him, not knowing who he was, but he gave me enough information that I was able to find the family, and then personal information that only him and his family would know. I've never been to Iowa, um, to validate
That's what it's all
that
about.
story.
Because a
You
lot of
know,
people are skeptics until they have something that teaches them different, and we don't teach this in our world.
I'll raise that hand because I was a skeptic. I didn't believe, but God showed me. You know, and He's changed my. I no longer fear death. I don't fear dying. We would not have this conversation if I still feared death and dying. I just couldn't talk about it before. But I got educated. I tried to reach out to some priests to understand the religious significance of what I experienced. Um, they wouldn't talk to me. They would brush me off, or they would hang up the phone. There was one pastor that my daughter goes to, my oldest daughter, who, when my daughter told him what had happened, because he was kind of staying up on my condition and everything. And when he told her what happened and some of the things that I had experienced, he says, I need to talk to your father. And I did. He and I had a 3-hour conversation one day. And he is on the religious side of things so far that has validated some of the things that happened to me, and or can validate through the Bible, some of the things that I experienced and saw. And, you know, he's helped me out tremendously.
Yeah, and the good news is at this point, with having the Research Foundation for Near-Death Experiences, there are more and more doctors, primary care surgeons, pastors, priests that have had the near-death experiences themselves and are starting to come forward and talk about it. And there's also doctors going, okay, I can't deny this, and they're not shy of
Exactly.
the medical record.
I was at the International Association for Near Death Studies conference. I was a speaker, not this year, but last year. And it's I don't know what the right word is, reassuring, or it's when you sit here and listen to someone else's experience and they describe somebody that you saw. A gentleman that I met, he described the man in the white robe, white beard, the gold sash. He was this man's guide throughout heaven, or you hear someone describe that pathway with the beautiful flowers and trees and the river. And you can sit there and say, I looked at my wife and said, that's the pathway I was on. I was there,
Well, I'm glad you're here.
It's powerful. Thank you. And it's changed my life. I believe now, God has blessed me in so many different ways, and he has a journey for all of us.
Absolutely.
And we need to, talk to him a lot, because the power of prayer is just, like I had said before, it's just amazing. He listens, he knows. Because in heaven, you just know what's happening, and there's no doubt in my mind that he's sitting up there and he knows each and every one of us and exactly what we're doing in our lives and what we're experiencing and what our struggles are. And those struggles that you're going through may have a reason.
For sure. Even if we don't understand them in the moment.
Correct. Exactly. You will understand it eventually, and you will understand what he wanted you to learn from that struggle.
Well, I will keep you in my prayers, and I hope
Thank you.
Continued health, and just stay off those stairs, Randy.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Likewise. Thank you so much for sharing your story and being able to help teach others. I think it goes a long way.
Thank you so much. You have a blessed day.
You too.